Good afternoon. Welcome to Columbia Rotary Club. We have a little extra treat this morning. I didn't know for sure that Ellen would get here on time to play, so I brought a ringer and to help do the Star Spangled Banner. Hugh Weathers, our Secretary of Agriculture. Y'all join with me.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose rough stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, sailors, that star-spangled banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you. That's great. Ellen, are you doing invocation as well? You're Ellen. Okay, all right. Well, then I'm going to pray for us. Are you praying?
You got it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Like we told you, please bow with me and pray. Heavenly Father, as we come together on this rainy Monday, thinking about spring and just how thankful we are for the water to come, we just think about how in your providence you watch over us in all things. And as we gather as Rotarians, I pray, Lord, you'll be among us at our tables and through this entire time, Lord, with your Spirit guide and direct us. We thank you for the General from Fort Jackson, General Becker. We pray, Lord, for our troops around the world, all that they do for us, and we sometimes just do not appreciate enough. Help us today to honor them and show them the appreciation we have, Lord. And all we do, I pray in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so now I still got everybody standing up, and so we are going to do the four-way test. Four-way test of the things we think, say, or do, and I want to remind you of this, that this is something you can use every day. You got to make a decision. So everything you think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Check your phones and the cart buckets, if you wouldn't mind passing those around. And Ellen, you'll come up and introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians.
Good afternoon to all of you. You are a good-looking crowd out there on this rainy day. And I have been happy to do invocation because I am so grateful to be here. We have no one visiting us from another club, but we do have some of our own who have guests. So, can you hear me? So, if you will stand, if you have a guest, and I'll ask someone to run around with the microphone. John?
Leroy Gibson, I have my son-in-law, Bill Addison, the first of the new day. Can I have two guests? Jim Morrison, who's Executive Director of SC Economics, and Hugh Weathers, who is our, as you know, is our Agriculture Commissioner, and he is on the ballot for the Republican primary, and welcomes all your support.
Much tired today. I have Jim Powell. He's just recently moved here to Columbia from Pennsylvania to join as Executive Director and helping out Hank Chardos over at Homeworks here in Columbia. So welcome.
Good afternoon, I'm Travis Hollis, and I'm proud to introduce my good friend and financial advisor, Brad Humphries.
A warm welcome to hope that you'll come back to visit us again soon. Have a good week.
We have a couple more that Charlie has guests here he's going to introduce.
I have several guests. I have first our speaker's wife, Sherry Beckham.
A little louder, Charlie.
Is this on? Right close. So, there you go. That's Sherry Beckham, our speaker's wife. I have my wife, Audrey. I have the General's aide, Captain David Dean. And we have Sergeant First Class Oliver, Aaron Oliver. Oliver sees to it that Captain Dean and the General get where they're supposed to be on time and safe. And lastly but not least, I have my son Charlie. Charlie is an old friend of General Becker's. They first met at Field Artillery Officers Basic course at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, right after they graduated from college in Army ROTC. And then they later wound up in Schweinfurt, Germany, in the same battalion, reporting to the same captain. And so they've known each other for a long time. Charlie was really excited to learn that General Becker was coming to London.
That's right. Thank you, Rob. Okay, Jimmy Derrick, you have health and happiness?
Good afternoon. General, I want to let you know that I was drafted in 1969, and so I went through basic training out at Fort Jackson and advanced infantry training at Fort Jackson. So it gets real hot here in the summer if you haven't been here. We hope that y'all are going to continue to keep Fort Jackson here. We've been hearing some bad stuff, so I'm sure you're going to take care of that for us. I don't know how many of you are always looking for something to do. You know, I know I am. So last night, our homeowners association at Governor's Hill, we got with the Gorman family and others in our subdivision, and we went to the little restaurant that is located right there overlooking Finley Park. It's called La Cafe Jazz, and it's opened on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday evenings. And they have a jazz band there that is extremely good. They have a lot of wine there that, well, they don't have any left now, because I think Robin and Mike drank it all. But anyway, they had nice hors d'oeuvres, and you know, once upon a time, and they've been able to gate this thing off, and once upon a time we had folks there who drank their wine straight out of the bottle, and we have eliminated those folks. I would encourage you, it's like a volunteer kind of thing. Sandra Martin is the volunteer who is in charge of this particular restaurant. I would encourage you to go down there and take a look at it. It's certainly an improvement for our city, as I know Matt Kimmel. Matt, I'm sure you're familiar with that particular operations. Anyway, you know, a lot of people know me as, I've been kind of into, you know, fast lane, been out there a long time, been in the street, working hard, you know, don't really, you know, hadn't been much of a family kind of guy, that kind of thing, you know, I've just been kind of out there, and this Thursday night, we got our two grandsons, one of which will be 4 in another month, and the other one is 2, and we had them on Thursday and Friday and Saturday, and finally the parents arrived at lunchtime yesterday. So we, you know, trying to fill what to do in Columbia. Let me tell you what, I don't know how long it's been since the last time you've been to the zoo, but that has to be just the most remarkable thing that Sachs Grants has ever done. I mean, that thing is so wonderful. And of course, we also did Adventure, which is also equally, well, you just can't beat that zoo. I mean, I tell you what, when that giraffe came up and ate that grass out of that little 4-year-old's hand and tickled him with his tongue, I mean, that was really, you know, we got a lot to be proud of here. But my point in that is this, is I'm starting to feel a little old. So, you know, I was whipped. Okay, I was whipped yesterday. And then I had to go out and show a house. And of course, I get out there and the guy, you know, I think I'm getting ready to write a contract. And then I said, by the way, have you been approved by a mortgage company yet? Well, no. He said, but I just bought a car and I got approved for that. So I said, well, that's good. So we wrote the contract up. Well, long story short, he had a credit score below 550, which means he can't buy anything. So, a couple of weeks ago, I decided, you know, all these internist doctors, they all tell you that you know, we don't know who's going to take care of you in the future because nobody wants to be an internist doctor anymore, and we can't make any money on the Obamacare deal and all that. I mean, you listen to poor doctors that live at the lake in, you know, 8,000 square foot houses with 200 feet on the water, and it really makes you feel poorly. I decided that I was going to do that new thing where you call that doctor and he, you know, you go to see him and he's the only guy you got. So, you know, I forget what you call that. So my question to him was will I live to see 80? So I recently picked this new primary care doctor, and after 2 visits, an exhaustive lab test, he said I was doing fairly well for my age, which is in the 60s. I was a little concerned about that comment, and I couldn't resist asking him the following question. Do you think I will live to be 80? He asked me the following question. Do you smoke tobacco? No. Do you drink beer? I lied and said no. Do you drink wine? Once again, I lied and said just a little bit. And do you drink hard liquor? And there's any, you know, every night I love a 12-year-old Macallan on the rocks in a red cup with no ice. But I said no. Then I said, and also I don't do any illegal drugs, okay, which is true. I told the truth on that one. Then he asked me, do you eat ribeye steaks? And I said, no. Do you eat barbecued ribs? And I love barbecue. But I don't eat the ribs, I just get the cut up. So I said no. I told him, I said, my former doctor told me that all red meat is very unhealthy. Then he asked me, do you spend a lot of time in the sun? Well, you know, I got a pool, okay? So, I mean, and I have a place at the beach. So what would you do? Obviously, you like the sun, but I said no. He said, do you like playing golf? And I said, absolutely not, because I've never played around a golf in my life. Do you like the boat? Don't have a boat. Do you like to go sailing? Don't have a boat. Do you like to hike? Absolutely, I do not, because I did that out at Fort Jackson. And do you like to bicycle? And I said no, because I don't own a bicycle.
You're a dull fellow.
That's right. Then he asked me the following question. Do you gamble? And you know, I really don't gamble, although if Connecticut wins tonight, I'm going to win $1,600 and I'm going to be really happy. This was before I made that bet. So I said no. He says, do you drive fast cars? No, I do not. I drive fast, but it's not a fast car. And then he asked me the following question. Do you have a lot of sex? And I immediately said no. He looked at me and said, then why do you even give a damn if you win?
That sounded so true up until that. All right, Jim Reynolds is going to induct a couple of new members. Jim?
Good afternoon. We're delighted to have two new members who are going to be inducted today, and I'd ask if they would come up and stand in front of the podium and face the audience so you can get a good look at your new members. In fact, we have Mr. and Mrs. Oliver who are joining today, but they're not married to each other. Very unusual. Our first new member is Brenda Oliver, and Brenda is married to Rush. She is with the City of Columbia. She is the Cultural Arts Specialist for the City of Columbia and lives in Columbia. Is a graduate of the University of South Carolina, attends Grace Baptist Church. Her hobbies include pottery, gardening, sewing, and crochet. She is the founder of the Creative Journey to Honor Wounded Warriors, and very fitting that you're being inducted today from General Speak. And is also a board member of Children Unlimited. Her classification is Government, City, Cultural, and Brenda's sponsor is Lee Lumpkin. Brenda, would you please step forward and take a hand from our members? Brenda, we welcome you to the Columbia Rotary Club. We also have Pete Oliver, who is married to Diane, not Brenda. And Pete is the Small Business Development Center Area Manager. He lives in Lexington. His hobbies are his grandchildren, and it sounds like Jimmy understands that as well. Once you have grandchildren, there isn't time for anything else. He is a graduate of the University of South Carolina, attends Ebenezer Lutheran Church, and his sponsor is John Durst. Pete, welcome to the Columbia Rotary Club. If y'all would just turn for a minute and face the podium. We're delighted to welcome you to the Columbia Rotary Club. Rotary is about service above self. We're a world's oldest service organization. And the two fundamental issues for Rotary is service and fellowship. And we are delighted to have you as a member. You will enjoy meeting every member of our club. And I encourage you to sit at a different table every Monday that you come, so you'll have an opportunity to see everybody in this club and understand what they are and what they do. You'll be amazed at the people you meet. And we're delighted that you're here, and we look forward to getting to know you as well. So again, thank you, and welcome to the Columbia Rotary Club.
Thank you. As Carl comes up, he's going to talk for a few minutes about the golf tournament, show you some pictures from last year. I want to remind you that our board, there's a number of folks that are volunteering to help this. Carl, hopefully you can show some of them, but even small sponsorships are going to be helpful as we lead up to this. Last week I told you that the scholarship committee was meeting. They met with the people last week. The students came in. Neil said they had a great crowd, and they're going to meet in a corner. Neil, I don't know which one. I guess I'm going to choose this one, and you can decide to change it if you want. They're going to meet as a committee, so if y'all would meet Neil in the corner, and anybody else that wanted to sit in on that just for your own edification to see what they go through in choosing these students for scholarships. But they are why we do this and raise money, so I ask you to be generous and think about this tournament, what happens, and then as we've had a theme of fun this year, Carl's going to talk a little bit about the fun at the golf tournament. Carl?
Well, happy Masters Week to everybody. By a show of hands, how many of you are lucky enough to be invited to go down to watch the golf this week? Okay, by everybody's hand up, these are the people who are invited for the Rotary Golf Tournament this year. Let me see your hands. Everybody in the club, that's right. You're all invited. We've got something for lunch. Come out and just enjoy having a nice lunch at a beautiful facility. The Windermere Club, if you're not familiar with where it is listed on the flyer. So we really want you to come out and enjoy the hospitality there. Put some pictures up here that I think y'all will enjoy from last year. There's one thing in common. They all have a great smile on. They're having a big time. All but one. And that was the goose that had homesteaded number 9 tee box. There wouldn't have anybody on there. You wouldn't have as much fun as everybody else. But we do hope that you'll register. We still need some more registrations. We'd like you to come out. You do not have to be a good golfer to play in this tournament. You just have to love to have fun. So we'd like you to come out, enjoy it, register. We still need more sponsors. So if you sponsored last year and you haven't stepped forward, we're looking for you to come up. And we also have a great dinner afterwards. So if you want to volunteer, please fill out the form. If you want to come out for lunch or dinner, also fill out the form. So thank you for your support of this year's golf tournament. These will be on the website.
Thank you, Carl. And I know you guys have played in the Captain's Choice, and you go, everybody plays, and they come in and sit around and wait for the scores to be posted. But I don't know exactly what they got planned, but I think part of it, because there's so many people that aren't golfers, we want to have golf as a prelude to a big party. So forget about golf, you don't care about golf, and come to a big party afterwards, and we'll all join together and have some fun that day. Okay, one other thing I want to make by way of announcement is you know, last week we had a club conversation about venues and that sort of thing, and we have secured on April 21st a return to Agape to just experience that as a run-through for the club. We're going to do that, and we will vote sometime in early May so that we have time kind of to make any decisions we need to make from there. The board's going to meet next week, so I am taking and continuing to take comments. I have gotten very, very thoughtful written comments that I've been able to share with the board. And it's not too late to let us know what you think and let your heart be known, and we'll share that. And so anyway, continue to do that. And with that, Charlie King will introduce our program. Charlie.
Thank you, President Hal. Army Brigadier General Bradley A. Beckham is the 46th Commanding General of the United States Army Training Center in Fort Jackson. General Beckham was commissioned in May 1986 following graduation from the University of California at Davis. Prior to coming here, General Beckham served as the Deputy Director for Joint Training, Joint Force Development, where he oversaw an organization that provided a one-stop shop for preserving jointness and developing the joint force while working closely with NATO's Allied Command Transformation and other multinational partners. Other assignments include a tour as Chief Commanders. Am I coming through on this? Other assignments, other joint assignments include a tour as Chief Commander Initiatives Group, U.S. Forces Iraq, from June 2009 to July of 2010, and Special Assistant to the Commander, United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, U.S. Forces Korea, 8 U.S. Army, that's a mouthful, from November 08 until June of 09. General Becker also served as the Deputy Commanding General, 25th Infantry Division at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, from July 2010 to June 2012. That sounds like a nice vacation, but in December of 2010, he took off for Iraq from Hawaii to be the Deputy Commanding General, 25th Infantry Division, U.S. Division, Summer, during Operation New Dawn, Iraq, and that lasted from December of 10 to December of 11. Then he returned to Schofield Barracks at Hawaii, where he finished his tour there as Deputy Commanding General of the Deputy Commanding General of 25th Infantry Division. In 2007, in July 2007 to October of 2008, he served as Commander, 3rd Battlefield Coordination Detachment, 8th U.S. Army, Korea. He also served as Commander of the 2nd Battalion, 8th Field Artillery, 25th Infantry Division, Fort Lewis, Washington, and led that unit during Operation Iraqi Freedom. His awards include the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal with 4 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Army Commendation Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Army Achievement Medal with 3 Oak Leaf Clusters. He has earned the Combat Action Badge, the Parachutist and Air Assault Identification Badges, and is Ranger qualified. Well, that's not only a mouthful, but I'm sure when he wears all that, it's a chest full. The Beckers have 2 sons, Derek, who has just completed Washington State and will be joining the Army in September, and Andrew, who is a student at Gonzaga in Washington State and is in the Army ROTC. Earlier, when I was introducing my son Charlie, I said what friends he and General Becker had been at the early stage in General Becker's career. Well, my son Charlie and his wife Sue said that among their group in Germany that they were friends with, the group all agreed that if anybody in their group was going to make general, it was going to be their friend Brad. Now, approximately 26 years later, I'm proud to present to you Brigadier General Bradley A. Becker, Commanding General of Fort Jackson.
It's an honor to be here, and I appreciate you letting me come and talk with you today. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Talking in the mic. Okay, now, there was some truth to that. Now, most of that just means I've been around a long time. But Charlie and I did go to OBC together, to our officer basic course together, and Charlie had to carry me through that, because it's a lot of gunnery skills, artillery's kind of technical, and I was a political science history major, so I wasn't too good at that stuff. Then we got to Germany, and we were assigned to the same fire support unit, and again, Charlie had to carry me through that. So when he found out I was coming here to Fort Jackson to be Commanding General as a general officer, I'm not sure it was excitement as much as it was surprise that I actually made it this far. So Charlie and I and Sue and my wife Sherry, we've all been friends for a very long time. So it's great to have Charlie here and finally link back up after more than 20 years of not seeing him. What I'd like to do is just spend a couple of minutes, and for those of you who have spent any time in government service, you know we love PowerPoint slides, except all my PowerPoint slides for the most part are just pictures, so that you kind of get as I'm talking about Fort Jackson, I'm talking about drill sergeants, I'm talking about training, you can kind of see some pictures of what I'm talking about. So not too many words on the slides, but I'll spend about 15 minutes try and get through kind of quickly. Just kind of give you an overview of Fort Jackson, who we are, what we do. I know a lot of you out there have had experience. Several of you went through basic combat training or basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. But I want to talk a little about what we're doing now. And then I will spend a few minutes kind of talking through what you may have heard in the press recently about future cuts and sequestration, how that can impact Fort Jackson. I won't dwell too long, but I will just kind of give you the highlights. I think that the media here has actually done a very good job of providing some very accurate information. And then I want to open it up for some questions, and I know that y'all are on a time schedule, so I want to leave a few minutes for questions, and I'll be happy to answer just about anything you can throw at me. So with that, I want to start a little bit with our tradition, because that's really important to who we are today, and I know we've got a lot of veterans in this room, so you'll appreciate that. But Fort Jackson was established originally as Camp Jackson in 1917, and it was a result of the state of South Carolina donating land to the U.S. government in hopes that the U.S. government, Department of Defense, would put a fort here in South Carolina to train soldiers for World War I. And I think that's so important because of all the places I've ever served, I've never experienced the kind of relationship that this community has with its fort. And I've served really all over the world, all over the United States. And I really do think that goes back to that 1917 and that relationship that was started when this state donated this land, which the government gladly accepted and bought some additional land so that we could establish a fort here at Fort Jackson, at that time Camp Jackson, to train soldiers for World War I. Okay, well, we've continued that tradition ever since 1917, nonstop. We're coming up on our 100th anniversary here in July of 2017. So we trained 500,000 of the greatest generation for World War II. We continued that through Korea, Vietnam, and then through the Cold War. We never stopped even when there weren't wars. It was the interwar period, but it seemed like every generation that we trained was headed off to some future war. And we, here at Fort Jackson had a huge contribution to every single one of those wars. Next slide. Now this group here, I want to talk, this is our kind of our current, I put this up on tradition, but these are our current soldiers that we've been training for the last 12 to 13 years. That most of them joined the Army while we were at war after September 11th, 2001, and receiving that same training and that same spirit that we've been doing since 1917. And sometimes this generation gets kind of a bad rap. They're tied to their iPhones and their video games and their computers. But I will tell you, I want to read a few statistics here because I don't have them memorized. But I refer to this generation as the next greatest generation. They have, over the last 13 years, earned 9 Medals of Honor, 28 Distinguished Service Crosses, which is the nation's second highest honor, 703 Silver Stars, another 12,700 awards for valor, 168,000 Bronze Stars, and almost 31,000 Purple Hearts. We've also these young men and women have also earned 200,000 combat infantryman badges and combat action badges for directly engaging the enemy in combat. And I will tell you, for our veterans who are in this room, they would make you proud. Their commitment, their discipline, their dedication, and quite frankly, the ferociousness with which they fight when they're forced to. And I've spent 3.5 years interact with these young men and women. They are tough. And so you should all be very proud of this young generation, that it will be our next generation in years to come. That slide will come up and people say, well, that's an old looking uniform. Those are old looking weapons. They look new now, but that's the generation that we'll be talking about in the future. Unfortunately, it's also the generation that did the heavy lifting in Iraq and Afghanistan, still going on in Afghanistan. They just had the elections, which by all counts have gone pretty well. But this is the same generation that we're drawing down, and we're asking a lot to leave the military. We were going from 560,000 to 490,000 pretty quick here in the next year and a half. That's 70,000 people that we're putting out. Not people that are retiring, but young men and women who've done some heavy lifting that will be entering our workforce because the Army's just getting smaller. And then I'll talk in a few minutes about the impacts of potential future cuts, but probably another 70,000 will be asking to leave the service here between 2016 and 2019. So that's about 140,000 folks that we're going to be putting out back into the community, and I think that's important to you all because, again, these are very committed, dedicated, great young men and women who did a lot of great work for our country over the last 13 years. And it's not that they were poor performers and they couldn't rise to the next rank. It's just that we're getting smaller, and many of them are going to have to leave the service. So, You know, how we bring them back into our communities, how we make them productive members of our workforce is going to be very important. And again, this is a group right here that can do a lot to help that. And South Carolina has, through hiring our heroes and other programs. You've all done a great job. Next slide. Talk a little bit about training. Fort Jackson is the largest initial entry training site in all of the United States Army. We trained close to 75,000. I think it was closer to 73,000 this year. Our projections always end up being a little bit bigger than what we end up training. But we had about 73,000 come through. 54% of all soldiers that enter the Army through basic combat training come through Fort Jackson, South Carolina. There's 3 other sites, one at Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Between those 3 sites, they do the other 46%. But 54% of all soldiers entering the United States Army come through Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And 61% of all of our female soldiers that serve in the Army come through Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Our basic combat training piece of that, like I said, for last year was 45,000. This year will be probably about 45,000. We projected for 47, but it usually comes down a little bit. So it'll be about 45,000 again here in this fiscal year of 2014. We also train another 28,000 folks, not in basic combat training, but there are adjutant general personnel folks, our finance soldiers. We also train chaplains, not just all Army chaplains come through Fort Jackson, South Carolina. All chaplains, all services come through Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And we also we have a school where we train wheel mechanics. It's called Advanced Individual Training. So about another 28,000 soldiers that will train at Fort Jackson outside of basic combat training. And then finally, we train about 2,000 sailors a year. These are folks, they're sailors, and we obviously don't train them how to sail because we don't know how to do it. But they're folks that are going to go to Iraq. Well, they were going to Iraq. Now they go to Afghanistan and the Horn of Africa to support Army units. So we train them in basic combat skills, just like we do with our soldiers. A lot of these are pretty senior Navy personnel from 06 on down, but we train them in Army type of training, basic combat skills, so that they'll be able to get through their deployment safely. Next slide. Okay, so I said that the heart of what we do, you know, the 45,000 a year, is basic combat training. And what that means is we take a civilian who has raised their right hand and said they want to become a soldier, and we transform that civilian into a soldier in 10 weeks. And it's not an easy task. We only have about 15% of the entire population that's even qualified to come in to be a U.S. soldier. And then there's only about 1% of those folks who actually raise their right hand and say, I want to come through. But in that 10 weeks, we take these young men and women, our national treasure, we transform them into soldiers. The first 3 weeks are called Red Phase, and that's where there is total indoctrination into what it means to be a soldier. We spend a lot of time with the Army values, what we are as an organization, customs and courtesies, marching, physical training to try and build their strength, and so forth. Those first 3 weeks are usually very, very eye-opening for these young men and women as they join the Army. The next 3 weeks we call White Phase, and that's where we start to get some of those basic combat skills. They spend a lot of time at the ranges. They shoot almost every day through 2 programs we call Basic Rifle Marksmanship and Advanced Rifle Marksmanship. They spend a lot of time on their weapons. And then when they get to their last 3 weeks, it's Blue Phase. It's more about their field craft, their field skills, their continuing their basic combat skills in a field tactical environment. So it's a progressive program. It takes 10 weeks for a soldier. A lot will recycle if they don't shoot well, then they got to get pushed back and learn, continue to practice shooting. Some soldiers will have challenges with the physical training. If they don't meet the standards, they get recycled, and then they get more time to train and build their physical strength. But for your average soldier, it'll be 10 weeks that gets through here. Next slide. Then the next part of the transformation is what we call advanced individual training. And here at Fort Jackson, we only have 2 advanced individual training units. One trains wheeled mechanics, the other trains personnel, Adjutant General's Corps. Everybody else goes to some other part of the Army for their advanced individual training. And they continue reinforcement of what they learned in basic combat training, but they also start to learn their very specific skills. What you see here on the bottom is what we do here at Fort Jackson. Those are wheel mechanics, and they're pulling apart an engine. And they will learn everything they need to know about taking care of Humvees and all of our other wheeled vehicles. And when they leave there, they'll be experts as wheel mechanics. And in the top slide there, you've got some of our personnel learning about the computer skills and the personnel systems. So that's the second phase of their transformation before they head off to their first unit of assignment as a U.S. Army soldier. Next slide. Okay, at the heart of that transformation is United States Army Drill Sergeant. And these are young men and women, on average about 32 years old. They on average have 11 years of service. 99% of them have recent combat experience. And interestingly enough, 7% of our male drill sergeants and 40% of our female drill sergeants are single parents. So they come here, and an average day for a drill sergeant starts at about 4:30 in the morning, have the soldiers up at 05, PT at 05:30, and they're usually, lights out is at 2200. Drill sergeants are getting them into their barracks around 2100. So their day is very, very long. So we actually have 24-hour daycare at Fort Jackson for the drill sergeants who are single parents, especially for our female drill sergeants, a huge population. But we couldn't do this training without them. These drill sergeants that transform our civilians into soldiers over these 10 weeks, they're handpicked. They're the top 20% of all of our non-commissioned officers across the United States Army. So they're truly a unique breed of individual. Again, they work long 15, 16, 17, 18-hour days, and they work 6 days a week. Training on Saturday is no different than training on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Sunday they get a little bit of a break. The soldiers do some details. They go to church, but we don't have any core training events on Sundays. That's kind of the one day that the drill sergeant has off to spend some time with their family. Next slide. Okay, Fort Jackson is bigger than just basic combat training. I'll run up there on the top left. We have the Drill Sergeant School coming up on the 50th anniversary of that. So every one of those drill sergeants that I was just describing to you went to school here at Fort Jackson, South Carolina to become a drill sergeant. It's the only drill sergeant school in the United States Army. So every drill sergeant from Fort Sill to Fort Benning, Fort Leonard, and Fort Jackson goes through training right here at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. To the right of that, we've got the 81st Regional Support Command, commanded by Major General Beck. It's a reserve unit, also resides on Fort Jackson. I don't have command authority over that unit. They're just one of our tenant units here at Fort Jackson. We've also got the, as I mentioned, the chaplaincy school, and again, that's all Army chaplains are trained here, as well as Navy and Air Force chaplains receive their training right here at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. To the right of that, we've got our medical team. We've got a hospital at Fort Jackson, Moncrief Army Community Hospital. Then down below, I said we train 2,000 sailors a year. We've got a detachment that oversees, it's soldiers that do the training, but we've got a Navy detachment that oversees that program. And then to the right, you see a bunch of young men and women raising the right hand. Those are folks that get recruited by the recruiting battalion that resides right there at Fort Jackson. It's the Columbia Recruiting Battalion, and that's them being sworn in before they come to basic combat training. Next slide. A little bit about the fort itself. We've got 3,500 active military, 3,500 civilians, about 7,000 in our permanent workforce. We've got about 12,000 families, and we support nearly 46,000 retirees. And we get about 200,000 visitors a year, and a large part of that are families traveling from all over the United States and outside the United States to see their soldiers graduate from basic combat training every Thursday. So every Thursday we have between 1,000 and 1,200 soldiers graduate all throughout the year, except a week in June and a couple weeks in December where we don't have graduations. And that's where these visitors come from. And it's a great opportunity because they all stay downtown. This is their first taste of Columbia. And I ask every family, and I see a good chunk of them on Wednesdays. They come in on Wednesday, they spend the day with their soldier, they graduate Thursday morning, then they depart for their advanced individual training. And I always ask the family members, how are you enjoying your stay? How are you being treated? And they always say, wow, Columbia, what a wonderful place. Everyone's treating us great. You know, because again, they may not be used to that, the Southern hospitality where they come from. So, but it's a great opportunity to kind of showcase Columbia every Wednesday and Thursday when these families come to visit. The economic impact here, anywhere between $2.6 and $3 billion a year to the Columbia Midlands community. So the fort has a very large impact on this community as far as the economic impact. Next slide.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what we produce, American soldiers. And we do it 45,000 a year, and they're great young men and women. You should be very proud of them. And again, I think that this is the most military-friendly community I've ever served in, and I think our families experience that when they're here. And unfortunately, the soldiers don't get to experience that because they're locked on post. They never leave. They experience their drill sergeant is what they experience. So, But I always tell them, as I talk to them at graduation, that if they ever have the opportunity to come back and visit, that they really need to, because this is truly a wonderful community. Next slide. Okay, what I would. Okay, I'm just going to spend about 2 minutes talking. You probably saw the news clips in the last few weeks that Fort Jackson could lose up to 3,100 positions. You know, when Congress initiated the Budget Control Act in 2011, which started the first rounds of sequestration, the Army was told you're going to go to 490,000. Originally, they had until 2019 to do it, then they were told to do it by the end of 2015. But at 490,000 end strength, we're coming down from 560 plus. It did not have a significant impact on Fort Jackson. We still have to produce just about the same number. Our projections were about 42,000 in the future. So we saw very little change. We were projecting very little change here at Fort Jackson. Recently, Congress initiated the Congressional Budget Act, which pushed sequestration off until 2016. So the Army is operating on a budget through the end of fiscal year 2015. And that budget allows us to maintain a force about 450,000, not as big as what the Chief of Staff of the Army was hoping, but still large enough to be able to execute what we have to do under the Defense Strategic Guidance in the future. Unfortunately, sequestration will be back unless Congress acts. Unless Congress passes legislation, there will be another round of sequestration that starts in 2016. Based on those cuts, they're across-the-board cuts. We already know how big they're going to be for Department of Defense. And it's not just DOD, it's across government to get control of government spending. But the cuts to DOD will push the Army down to 420,000 or potentially even lower. At 420,000, the Army is going to have to make some serious choices in the future. And Fort Jackson is one of 30 installations that's just being looked at to say, if you were to cut, in our case, 3,100 positions, what would the economic impact be to the community here in the Columbia Midlands area? So we're doing that study now, and we'll provide that economic impact study back to the Army. The Army will then have to choose, of the 30 installations it looked at, Fort Jackson's just one of those 30, you know, where do we cut and how much do we cut? So there's no guarantee that Fort Jackson, even if sequestration hits in 2016, that Fort Jackson will lose 3,100 positions. But it is a possibility, and it is something that's being looked at by the Army. You know, what does that mean for us? And that's why I talked with Congressman Wilson, Senator Scott, and Graham. It's really important for Congress to figure out something in the future to avoid these across-the-board cuts that could take place in 2016. I don't personally think Fort Jackson will go anywhere. I think it's too important for what we do. It's the largest initial entry training site, but it could have some serious impacts in the future. So it's just something we've got to watch out for. So with that, I've spoken now for 20 minutes, and I said I wouldn't talk any longer because what I really want to do is open it up for your questions. Hopefully I haven't put you to sleep. Sir.
General, the soldiers go through basic training for 10 weeks all throughout the year. So you've got new ones coming in every week to start the program?
We do.
The ones who come through and they have the 10-week stretch during the spring and the fall, do they come out at the same rank as those who go through August?
They do, but they don't get the bragging rights to say, I went through the last hard class. Yes, they do. My son's getting ready to go to basic training, as you heard, and so we're looking at when he might go, and I said, I don't think you want to go in July or August. So he starts in the middle of September when the weather starts to cool off. Sir.
What's your washout rate? I mean, I don't know if that's the right word or not.
We have an attrition rate anywhere from between 10 and 15% with any group, and it's been consistent for the last 50 years. We've been keeping these statistics. Averages about 10 to 12%. You'll see a high. I've seen a group as high as 18%. I've seen it as low as 5 to 6, but it's been pretty consistent for the last 15 years, or last 50 years. Between 10 and 12% of the soldiers won't make it. Some it's for physical, they just don't have the physical strength or endurance. Some there's just mental issues. They just don't have what it takes up here, and they don't cut it. And then others, there's just medical conditions that may have already been existing before they got here, but they weren't caught. Sir?
If you're downsizing the number of soldiers, why are you still recruiting and bringing trainees in at the same rate when you're trying to bring it down on the other end?
Well, the the numbers, we only have the numbers through 15. And those numbers were projected based on a force of 490,000. So we were not bringing, what we were doing is through natural attrition, we were attriting over the years, but we were still going to try and bring in about the same number for a force of 490 as we were when we're about 520 right now. So this last year we sat around 520, we brought in around 47,000, 45,000. We were going to bring in another 45,000 this year. Now it's just through Fort Jackson. The other installations may have seen some decrease. I don't know, but overall I think we're bringing in about 80 to 85,000 a year across all of the different training sites. Below 490, that number will come down. We just haven't seen the projections yet. However, it may not come down equally at all locations. The Army may decide that, hey, we only need to bring in 75,000 or 73,000 or 72,000. It makes sense to send the bulk of that to Fort Jackson. It's already the largest site. Maybe we won't do it at X, Y, or Z. Because I don't know that they will make the equal cuts across all 4 installations. Sir?
Yes, John, I forgot to mention to you also that I did go through the drill sergeant school out at Fort Jackson, and it was quite a very good experience for me. I just sold a house to a drill sergeant who told me he was thinking about getting out of the Army, that he felt like that things were changing a lot. I said, like, what do you mean? He said, well, like you don't march anywhere anymore. They carry you in a truck everywhere you go. They bus you everywhere they go. And of course, I know y'all no longer have shiny shoes anymore, which was one of the things that we used to spend a lot of time on. Discipline that we received, so we would be able to react when we needed to react. Have we lost discipline? Has that gone away?
No, I don't think so. I do miss spit shining my boots, though. I took great pride in my boots. Every morning when I went to work, they were, Charlie, my boots were always spit shining. So
I shined my shoes before.
that's right. That's right.
I haven't shined shoes since I got out.
You know, our soldiers actually do walk to a good chunk of their training. Now, some of the training areas are at such a distance that they'd spend most of the day walking there, so they wouldn't get any training, so they will bus out to some of the more distant areas. But for the most part, they do walk, and when they're not on a range, they double time. That's a slow jog everywhere they go. So, you know, it kind of goes back to, like, I'll use Ranger School as an example. I went to the last Hard Ranger class, and everyone who's gone since, it's just been an easier school. So, I mean, so there is a bit of that folklore. I think that the discipline is there, though I think there are things we can do to increase our discipline. You know, drill sergeants, I've heard horror stories about soldiers having timeout cards and they could just, you know, take a break. None of that's true. I spent a lot of time out of training, and the drill sergeants are still drill sergeants. Now, some of the things that, you can't say things that are degrading or demoralizing. That doesn't mean a drill sergeant doesn't let a colorful word go occasionally in a sentence, but not necessarily directed at a soldier. So some of those soldiers will feel, some of the more senior guys will feel, boy, we used to be able to curse those guys up and down. Well, you know, we don't do that anymore, and I'm not sure that was really effective. But I think that I absolutely believe the discipline's there as I look at these trainees on the day that they graduate. And then again, having served in combat with them for 3.5 years, absolutely the discipline was there. Now, we have our bad apples. It's a large, you know, more than 500,000 people, so there are some folks that will mess up. But I think across the board, the discipline is there. Yes, sir.
General, not only are cuts in manpower being considered, and I'm sure equipment as well, but I'm also reading that there's serious discussion that pay for our military is going to be cut. And the military is about the last place that I have always considered needs a pay cut.
You know, there are a lot of talks on entitlements, whether it's our health care benefits that we get as soldiers, or our pay, or, you know, the commissary, or other entitlements that we get. All of that is being looked at by our senior leadership to say, where can we save money? Because our leadership is really in a pinch that as our budget gets smaller, they just can't afford to have units that we use this term following Vietnam, are hollow units, where on paper it looks like you've got a brigade or a division, but it's really just on paper. We want to make sure that the units we do have, even though we're going to be smaller, are fully manned, have the proper equipment, and we have the money to train them so that if we do have to deploy them, that they're ready to go. So, you know, where do we find cuts? And a lot of folks are taking a look at pay and benefits, retirement, and other areas. So, but again, there's some great organizations between AUSA and Military Officers Association that really fight hard, because we can't do it while we're wearing a uniform. So there are folks that try and help protect some of those benefits. Sir?
General, are today's recruits able to meet the educational and physical requirements that the military has?
The educational piece, yes. Everybody comes in with a high school diploma, and these are some of the smartest kids we've had. The physical requirement's interesting. They're challenged. And I expected when I went to our reception battalion, every Monday and Tuesday night between about 1900 or between about 7 at night and midnight, we get anywhere from 800 to 1,000 soldiers in on Monday, Tuesday night. I mean, fresh in their civilian clothes, getting off the bus. And I was expecting to see a lot of heavy, you know, dumpy-looking kids, and I wasn't. I was seeing kids that looked fairly fit. I mean, they looked lean. The problem is, what we're finding when we march them too much, too fast. They can march far if we march them really slow. But they're getting hip fractures. It's not knees, you know, or shin splints or things that we would normally associate where you're just doing a little too much too soon. But we're actually getting hip fractures like you would expect in somebody who's elderly. And it's because their bone density is just not what we would have experienced as kids, because we were always outside, always out running around, because we didn't have the video games. There was nothing to do in the house. So you went outside and you played. And while the kids may not be fat, they don't have the strength in their bone density. So we have had a lot of injuries, and that's been one of the challenges, is finding folks who are physically strong enough. And we want to make physical training even more challenging, but we've got to do it in such a way that we don't hurt them and we bring them along slowly, because most of them have the capability. They'll get there. They will build that strength. It's just going to take some time.
Thank you, General.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Jim Whitmire, you still here? What do you want to sing? God Bless America. How about that? God Bless America. Would before you stand, would those that are veterans, please stand first and let us recognize.